I call this meeting of the special meeting of the council to order. Ms. Burke, would you call the roll, please?
Council President Suzanne Souter.
Here.
Councilperson Joseph Day.
Here.
Councilperson Nerman Zubaka.
Here.
Councilperson Andrew Zelt.
Here.
Councilperson Brian Madaway.
Here.
Also present, Mayor Valerie Leary, City Administrator Antonina Tantillo, City Clerk and Finance Coordinator Courtney Taylor, and Mike Hoffman, City Solicitor.
Well, the first item is to discuss a possible vote on ordinance 553, of which we have, I think, and somewhat amended often here from prior, based on prior discussions.
Yeah, like we didn't incorporate all the changes yet, because we weren't sure what additional changes we wanted to make, if we wanted to keep talking about this, at this meeting. You know, we said talk about it throughout the whole, I didn't know we were ready. But I-
Yeah, no, thank you, Council President, thank you, Ms. Tantillo. My perspective is that, this is still, you know, in the oven, being baked and synthesized, and we most certainly appreciate everybody's feedback and, suggestions. And I think it's, still a work in progress.
Okay, so you're-
Yeah, I think so. We can try to incorporate changes for next meeting and have something hopefully that's final, that we can make minor changes and revisions and maybe vote on it. But yeah, I'm happy to listen if anybody else has any comments from last meeting to listen. Yeah. I think my biggest takeaway is that, you know, the way we're funding this is
right, it's
excess of funds, of revenue on any given year.
right, but it's still not, it's still,
It's not, the language
Unspecified.
hasn't been changed in there. I think
Right,
to reflect that
right.
conversation here.
so. Would we like to at least clarify that, even if we don't put in the specific percentages, but to say that instead of property tax revenues, I believe we discussed funding this from excess funds?
I think A, B, and C will probably be stricken down, in my opinion. Bottom of page 2-3. I think A, B, and C were, you know, talking about in over 3 years how to fund it, but we talked about funding it initially fully, and then just funding it, you know, with excess of revenue. And then D would, I think, remain saying that, you know, it would just, the interest accrued would be.
Right.
like,
I mean, for example, we've
Mhm.
been reserving the ARPA funds for for some kind of major project. And this, not so much the budget stabilization fund, but perhaps the capital
Absolutely, yeah.
improvements fund, that would be appropriate potentially to be funded out of the ARPA money, because we wanted to preserve that for capital
Absolutely.
improvements anyway, not just spend it on, you know, routine budget items.
Definitely.
And
So what's the amount that you would like to allocate for that
I
project?
haven't-
You know,
yeah,
because I think we were talking about $500,000 for capital SIP, I guess, let's say.
well,
As a start, but if we are adding the, you know, flooding, the number might be larger.
right, I think Mr. Day had suggested last time that potentially just fund it from our current reserves, since that's what the reserves are for.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be.
Or at least fund it significantly, if not fully.
I think the only change that to me would be the unrestricted moving to restricted, in a sense that it's now for capital infrastructure. The line is 125 right now, which is be 500 or a million or whatever we dedicate for the flooding, you know.
Right, we have said that, but we've never specified
Yeah,
it.
so I think I'm happy to talk
So
about
it
it now.
would be a
so we
way
can
to
present
preserve
something.
the ARPA funds specifically for the capital improvement, which could include any kind of our share of flood remediation or resiliency programs or other capital things that would come up.
I'm open to that. I don't know about Councilperson
Yeah.
Madaway and the rest of the council, but I'm absolutely open to earmarking what we already earmarked for that. Start.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay.
So if you fund it out of the reserves already, you're kind of like funding it in place. You're not actually decreasing revenues
No,
from the budget.
it would only be excess revenue in
Right.
a given year that would go distributed at a certain percentage. That's another thing we can discuss. What would go towards each fund if there was 50,000 in excess revenue in a given year.
At the end of the
50,
year, right.
75, 25, yeah, exactly.
Since we tend to budget conservatively by trying to overestimate expenses and underestimate revenues, we usually come out with some excess at the end of the year. And you're saying instead of just keeping that and carrying it over to the next year, we would put it in this fund.
A
and-
percentage of it.
and
Yeah, I
it's
think
the
just money
percent-
market retention reduces significantly and just goes into these two different funds. You know, that's kind of how I think. Well, on our paper here, would probably,
Yeah,
you know,
if
be
you look at
reflected,
slide
like-
14, I put it up behind you.
I think that's the major change. I would see the 8.4 being deducted and moved into bottom lines. So capital reserve on the bottom would be SIF with whatever amount we put there, right? And then another line added for budget stabilization, that would be 6 months of FY 25 budget. Or whatever we talk to the council
Yeah,
appropriate.
Am I correct that we currently have about 1.2 million in ARPA left?
Yeah, 1.3.
Roughly, yeah. So even if we just took half of that. So, you know,
Or even if you took it off, because everyone's been speaking about it for so long to
The flooding, you mean?
put, yeah, to put that towards flooding.
right,
Mhm.
now, putting it in this fund would not reserve it specifically for flooding, but since that would be capital improvement, it would certainly be legitimate to use it to that. It could also be potentially used for other capital projects.
Absolutely.
But I also agree that maybe it's best not to make final decisions until the budget is closer to being finalized.
Mhm. I mean,
For
we
both.
can put placeholders in place and say, I don't know, remaining funds in, I don't know, 1.2, 1.3, put in capital and then talk about whatever 6 months is the number for, what's the FY 25, do you remember?
7.4.
No, the one before that, the one where I set 7.2, right, so 3.6. Right, is that kind of?
That would be 6 months. worth,
Roughly,
yeah.
sorry. So,
It would at least get us to a minimum standard of reserve.
I can make a motion. 3 what do I say, 1.3? And then we can. Or instead of making a motion, could you amend this document for next meeting to put 1.3 million in
the-
capital? It can be rounded up, I presume, for everybody, so we're not saying 1.326.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And then same thing for the budget stabilization, whatever you think, rounding up the higher number 3, whatever the half of the current FY 25. And just round it to next 3.7, 3.6, whatever the number is, and then we can debate the final number in that meeting. But I think the 2.3 method of funding, you can strike A, B, and C, I think,
Mhm.
and replace, or not strike as it is, but replace that as how it's gonna be funded initially out of money market retention, and I think there might be a line somewhere in the end, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 point, where? Under the ordinances in this,
Section 2.
yeah, so initial deposit, so yeah, so page, towards the end, 222-12. Section 2 talks about putting 50%.
Mhm.
And section 3 talks about 500,000, so you can amend the 500 there for capital to, you know, let's for time being put 1.3 just right from that.
Yeah, I'll make those changes
Mhm.
and have them for the next meeting.
And that, yeah, I think you can delete those. I'm happy to work with you offline on the A, B, and C of the method of funding for both funds, because I think it just has to be changed the language about excess funds.
Yep.
Okay,
That's
other
fine.
comments?
So D would be B, I think, and
Yeah, we'll work through it. Just keep in mind, the end of June, the numbers that you're gonna see, it's not gonna reflect the end of the fiscal year because we still have a couple months to add in any lingering invoices. So we really won't know the true number until like September, October.
Mr. Dan?
The only thing that I had brought up previously, and I still think is a question, at least for me, for the capital and infrastructure fund. And again, I actually like the idea, but is the genesis for this that going forward, like out of this fund, we'll buy the garbage trucks, we'll lease the new police vehicles? Or is this a fund that we're not gonna touch and we're gonna budget those other things in other funds? You know, usually a capital fund is something that, you're buying your major capital improvements out of, whether it's roads or police cars or trucks.
think we
And I'm
have to
open to
do-
both. I just kind of wanted to be clear, like what our intentions were. I brought it up before, you know what I mean, about it, some kind of, city facility, and I don't know what the goal is here. And either way, again, I'm supportive, but I think it would be nice if we were all on the same page and say, no, we're gonna leave that sit, or no, we're gonna work out of that every year, and these other budget line items won't include the trash truck or the leases for police cars,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
I thought it was intent, yeah.
Again, open for considerations, and thank you, Councilperson Betty, for mentioning it. Just some immediate thoughts, would it possibly be helpful if we created like a dollar threshold, right? To say like expenses in excess of X amount would potentially come from capitalization fund, or do we kind of define it and list out certain types of items?
Well,
Like almost a glossary, you know?
I'm okay with either way, but here's my thought. So, okay, we'll just say we'll put in $500,000 this year, right? But, and we don't touch it, and then 2 years, we need a garbage truck, and the garbage truck is 350,000, right? But then we have a grant opportunity with the flooding, and then we're out, you know what I mean? We don't have the actual money. So, I mean, I do think it might be better for the city to actually have this as a complete reserve, and that we use it sparingly unless there's like an emergency or something. But I just think we all just need to be on the same page.
right.
Either way we do it.
I mean, the way it's worded is that what is defined as capital asset or capital improvement. 222-8A2 says includes, but is not limited to buildings, land, vehicles, heavy equipment, and major technology systems. But this doesn't say if we need a new tractor, that we have to buy it out of this. Or we could take 100,000 out of this and 250 out of
It's
general.
probably that more, like, because it would be redundant to move stuff from operating budget into this to say, we're doing everything out of this fund.
Yeah.
But really, we're already budgeting for those leases.
And again, I'm not even
It just
asking
could be
for a
like
change
only
here.
100,000.
No, it's almost like an understanding amongst council that I'm not gonna come back in 3 months and say, hey, you know what, I wanna, whatever, repave Harmony Street or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think we just have to have an understanding about what we're
I think-
really talking about here, what the parameters are.
I agree. I think it goes back to the conversation of creating this capital improvement plan, long-term, goals aligned, for all of us. So I think that will help clarify that too.
Yeah, I think once we see the 5-year plan and then what kind of, we're tackling through regular budget and grant sources and like what can this accomplish in addition.
Mhm.
Like I think we were talking about complex, for example, is one of those things, and how much of that are we putting aside and protecting for that, same what we do with flooding, right? So like if we're trying to make those things reality or 3 councils down the road or something.
Right, and we don't want to list, 12 items that this may be used for, and then that implies no other things.
Exactly.
Right.
And bind future councils, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when we're all gone,
Mhm.
we want to make it flexible. It's to be a tool, not handcuffs.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest takeaways to last meeting, flexibility and not say vagueness of the language, but whatever possible, make it not, specific to certain things. But I do see it as a supplement more and helping with strategic planning on both fronts. So,
So we finished with this item for tonight, and we're gonna
I think, no, but,
conclude it
but
when we're ready to.
if we're done with comments, yeah, but, I think
Yeah,
if we
no, I'm
want
not
to
trying
talk
to
about
cut
it, I
off
think
comments. Mr.
more
Johnson,
we can
because
get right now, more we can, revise the language, whatever needed, so.
Okay, thank you. The next item is just general issues of the,
Madam President?
yes,
I anticipate that this will probably be a long meeting, and it may be valuable to offer the public comments now instead of all the way at the end. Some people may not be able to. I mean, we could still offer them at the end, but they only get one shot. But I wouldn't want somebody to have to sit here for 3 hours to get their 3 minutes in either.
okay, sure.
Just a thought.
No, that's fine. Is that agreeable?
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Okay, so we will take public comments now. Usual rules, I assume there's a sign-in sheet. Go to the podium, sign in. You have 3 minutes and the timer's here.
Just for clarity. Same thing you did last, right? So we wait to the end or we do it now, right? You're gonna have public comment at the end as well.
That's what we did last time.
That's what they did
In
last
case somebody
time. I'm just
wanted to hear our debate.
You get one shot now or later.
I think so, yeah.
Right, everybody wants to wait till later, it looks like.
Fair enough for the long haul.
All right.
Okay, just wanted to give you the
Thank you.
chance.
I'm happy to share my coffee, my guys.
You're gonna have a very good.
Or let's not.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so new business, the discussion regarding our fiscal 26 general budget and grant fund recommendations. Just to
Yes.
continue, I think Ms. Cantillo and perhaps Ms. Taylor have things to tell us about that.
We do, we have a lot to share. So we have the third budget iteration in front of you. It's posted to the website. It'll be, the high points will be on the screen. But just to kind of reacclimate ourselves, the first budget proposal back at the beginning of May was for $7,483,598 with a proposed tax rate of 0.3678158. It came back in at the end of May with budget, proposed budget number 2, which was $7,688,355. That included requests for additions, some changes to revenue. We went through that in depth at the last meeting. And that had a proposed tax rate of 0.3746005. The budget before you is budget number 3, which is a total budget of $7,544,591 and a proposed tax rate of 0.556873.
3-5.
Mhm.
I think you said 5-5.
Yep.
Sorry, 0.355. Sorry, a lot of numbers to read. So I am going to go through your budget right now and list the differences that, between the last one and this one, and go over that. So, start on page 1. Public safety salaries, I reduced that line by 32,501. FICA for public safety, reduced that by 2,486.
Can you tell more about the salaries for public safety? What would the reduction due to?
I reduced hiring times.
Thank you.
So, because you, delayed hiring?
Yes. And then that also led to a reduction in health, dental, life ex.
Right, anytime you do that, it cuts the FICA and the health insurance,
Yes.
so.
So that was reduced by 167,200.
So is that a new person starting later in the year,
Yes.
fall or winter?
Winter.
Winter.
And then the pension was also reduced, for that by 930. Then we have debt service vehicles for public safety that sees an increase of 7,862.
Debt service,
Debt service, which we like page 4.
Increase the what, sorry?
Increased it by 7,862. We had to add a vehicle sooner in the year. We're seeing a lot of issues with one of the vehicles, and we just determined that instead of, throwing money at it, we needed to just bite the bullet and make that purchase now. And then that also leads to an increase, I think it's a couple lines down, on capital outlays, equipment and vehicles for public safety of 12,881.
That's,
2 lines under.
Yes.
all right.
We have salaries, building code enforcement. I slightly delayed the hiring of that new position.
Wait a minute, and that's page.
How about page 5?
So that's decrease.
Yeah, so that decreased the line by 4,640. I also decreased the salaries for public services by 16,713. Which, remember, that line was already reduced from last year because I took one hire off. I reduced that single new hire to only half a year. And that also reflected on the FICA with a reduction of 1,634. The health, like dental,
Right,
at 655, and the pension at 1170.
but they're related.
Then we go down a couple more lines to book and reference materials for public services. I cut the line completely with a reduction of 1,600. We are going to get a membership that'll allow us to make the purchases here. That'll, even if we decide to change the zoning code in the next year or two, it would still allow us to access that code.
Okay, is this the, what is it called, the Uniform Standard Building Code manual that we have to purchase?
ICC code books.
So where you gotta basically buy an online subscription instead of physical books?
Well, yeah,
Sorry, it's set to 78. Sorry.
thank you. I tried to load before, but I think I went back up.
So this way. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. Then right below that, we have computer and software expenses for public services. I reduced that line by 2,500. Just because we weren't seeing a ton of expenses in that line, and the year prior, 2024, we did see a large increase, but that was due to computers that were purchased. Then we have operating supplies for public services. I reduced that line by 1,500. We were trying to increase it. As presented at the last meeting, but we needed to make cuts. Below that, we have postage for public service. We reduced that by 400. Then we have fuel and lubricants for public services, which I think is on the next page. And we reduced that by 2,000. After that, we have yard waste for public services.
Oh, yeah, see, we haven't been spending what we budgeted.
Yeah, we had a very low year this past year, so I reduced that by 1,500. And if we skip a couple pages and go to mayor and council,
Page 10.
we have equipment purchases, reduced that by 1,000.
Sorry, where?
Second page on that, page 11, the second line.
Okay, oh, okay, you reduced it by 1,000.
Yes.
It's a zero.
And again, in 24 was that large amount because of new computers?
No, that was, yeah, that was the,
You weren't here then, I know.
no, it was
You
the,
came partway through.
the equipment purchase. It was the, AP equipment.
Oh, for the senior
For the
center,
senior-
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
the mics.
I just couldn't think of what it was called. Thank you.
So yeah, that's another continuing.
So yeah,
expense.
we reduced it. We had put in 2,000 just in case, but we reduced it to 2,000. You go beyond a couple of pages. Page 13 or 14. Salaries for admin, we built in some increases. So in order to, budget properly, that may change. And that was an increase in 14,000.
That's okay.
13 first.
No, at the top, yeah.
But also saw an increase in FICA of 994, health dental life of 3390, and a pension of 767. And if you go to page 16, I believe. We established a line called special projects and grants.
15, line, fourth line from the bottom.
15, not 16.
So we created this line for special projects and grants. Offline Councilman Nottaway and I spoke about, we're applying for a lot of grants and sometimes they have matching requirements. So I thought he brought up a good point that we should probably put a little bit aside for any small grants that we have. So we set aside 15,000 for that. And then at the last couple meetings, I spoke about conducting a fee study to look at all of our fees. And I did get one quote so far, and it was between 15, it was a very rough quote because I needed a very quick turnaround time, but it was between 15 and 20,000. So I will be getting more quotes, but it gives us a starting point for that project.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah, that was a good idea.
And go down a couple pages, you have temporary labor and slash consultant for farm. You had 6,000.
Sorry, just a second.
16, or page 16.
Oh, just one page.
Yes. And I'm sorry, what did it go down?
It didn't go down, it actually went up.
Oh, okay.
We had 6,000, I added 4,000, for, the possibility of another intern for next summer.
Intern for next summer.
Yes. Then right below that, employee training programs HR, I reduced that by 500. Because we have a mandatory anti-sexual harassment training this year, and it's not required next year, it'll be required again the year after, so we could reduce that. Then if we go to the insurance section, I know I spoke last meeting about, the fact that I was working on recommending some new quotes. I got a quote from our, existing, carrier and reduced the following lines. I reduced the public official liability by $240, the police liability by $427, and the property and liability by $6,031. The other,
That's based off the Newcastle Insurance Company? Sorry.
Correct. correct. The other, company gave me a better quote that reduces, the cost by $39,000. So
Overall across all of them?
overall across, which is a huge difference.
Right.
So I went back to Newcastle Insurance, let them know, this is what we're expecting, and they are going to look at their policy, see if there's any changes that they can make
Oh,
about
okay.
price, but not to, what we're getting.
Coverage, right.
And we'll go from there. So by the next meeting, I'll make a decision of which to move to. I'm
Does ours-
confident in both, no, you're fine, I'm sorry. I'm confident in both companies. I have experience with the previous company. They are an insurance trust for all municipalities in Delaware, and most municipalities are in them. I used them when I was with Townsend, and they do great work. We use them for our workers' comp here. So I think either company that we go with would be great. But we're looking at a really significant cost savings. I just want to be sure that we're comparing apples to apples. Sorry.
When is our policy up?
Either way. So we
Okay,
have
I
to
thought
by
it
next-
would be, but I wasn't sure. Thank you.
I'll tell you by the 18th, whether or not we're moving.
Who is the other potential provider? You mentioned the name already.
Trident's the carrier. GFIT is the program. So just to summarize on the expense side, we added 105,894. We reduced that
Sorry,
side.
am I saying that again?
We added 105,894. We reduced that side by 232,524 for a total reduction of 126,630. So we reduced a lot, but yeah, half that. And then just a few changes on the revenue side, which will be at the back of your packet, so we can include the grant budget in here.
Potential 40,000 more to that reduction.
Yeah.
So insurance changes this.
Pretty more.
Thank you.
The revenue could actually.
Yeah, the grant go first, in between.
All right, so for revenue, we increased a couple lines just as discussed at the last meeting. So property tax transfers, we increased that line to 450,000. We added 50 for council requests. Delinquent tax collection, we increased that to 20,500. And then the interest other,
I'm sorry, what was that increase? On the-
just $500.
Oh, just 500, okay, okay.
Was that supposed to be 25? Sorry, just curious,
Was
because
it?
I'm seeing 25 in the prior year. Was the delinquent tax supposed to be 25,000 or 2,500?
As you guys were discussing at the time, trying to push the,
Mhm. Just trying to figure out where, that was a typo, just because I'm seeing 25 over there.
no, you guys were talking about pushing the.
Oh.
Extending the
Yeah,
deadline.
so extend the deadline, so we'll have less penalties.
Yes,
Mhm.
thank you.
I know, to me, it sounds like.
And then interest other, we increased that to 150,000. And you're seeing a $50,000 increase. So the total revenue added was 100,500.
Just a second, sorry. So we increased interest other by 25? And can you say that again?
100,500. Overall.
230 total. Efficiencies, I guess.
227,130.
Was that?
227,130, I believe.
Yeah, the extra revenue
Revenue
went over
increase
for the
is in the-
expense.
Thanks, Jeff.
Increases, so.
Yeah.
And thank you for going through and tightening it up, even 500 or 1,000 or, you know what I mean, throughout all. the
That's okay.
budget. It's- I do appreciate you going through and looking at that and and trying to get exactly where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything we can do to reduce it. I mean, we certainly have, needs that for these departments, but I think waiting a couple months, thankfully won't make or break us. So we'll work with what we have. Sorry, my computer does. Yeah, just disconnect it, just give me one second to reconnect to the TV.
Okay, but also in the meantime, then on page 41, just about separation day. These contributions, I'm just trying to figure out, why has it been structured at 33,000 every year? And it seems it's been no more than 20,000, any of the actual numbers. Just curious, I wasn't,
The projected income is based on the state grant that we
Okay.
get.
we just.
And then there's other revenue when the event allies get sponsorships and so forth. That's my guess. But we can't assume that we're gonna get those, so we can only budget for the state grant, which I guess we don't have for next year, right? Okay, well, we've submitted the request and they've always given it to us in the past. This is the 250th, so.
So, we're hopeful.
Question 141. Approaching the admission sales. Is that simply the pass through, or is that the portion of excess that is essentially given back to the city?
I believe it's just sales and dinner,
Okay.
and
Alright.
it's used to cover the event. Some of it is used to cover the event, event managers. cost.
My understanding is overall, in the big picture, separation day is revenue neutral for the city.
Yeah, we don't carry over too much.
Yeah, they need to keep a small pool for incidentals when there's startup fees, and startup costs.
It's like the pot's always there. Moving forward.
So we did request more for next year, since it's the America 250 celebration.
Oh, from the state, I mean,
Correct.
we'll see.
Yeah. Just like everything. So because I just went through the revenues and expenses, kind of line by line, the changes, I'm not gonna go into those slides. That's okay with you. I wanted to bring back up the available funds slide. Just so that-
That's kind of.
slide 14. Just a reminder about unrestricted funds, but reminding you that we still have $1,208,000 to send it to the budget. And, the ARPA funds, that we have in our reserve that we've taken to our unrestricted funds of $1,371,000. Leaving us with actual unrestricted of, 5.9 million.
Oh, right, after you take out the remaining expenses for the rest of the year.
So just to go back, I'm now on slide 15,
So can I talk further? So like, let's, just for, back to these funds that we're talking about, capital budget. So like, let's assume what the ARPA line is capital, right? And then out of that 6 million below it, let's say 4 goes, just as a round up. So there's about 2.5 million of funds once we take out flooding, once we account for flooding in future and 6 months of worth of budget. Is that a fair assessment, just looking at these numbers? 2.5 million. I mean, I know that it all depends on the expenses right now, 1.2 million. I don't, that could move that up higher if
Yeah.
we don't expend it all.
Would you actually take all of the ARPA funds and use it completely up?
That's what I'm saying. If we move 1.37 as a flooding,
You keep saying, but it could be,
If it's
or
within the
yeah,
capital fund,
yes.
you could-
Yeah, but I'm saying like if we put like, just looking at a budget to understand for this fiscal year, if that's aside, I guess it's about 2.5 million. And whatever remains of the unexpended stuff from 1.2 million. So that kind of sounds,
a lot.
it's all, yeah. Yes, but I'm just trying to operate on those numbers to see like what we have altogether. So it's 8.5 still. Well, minus 1.2. All right, 7.3. Sorry, you were saying?
flash up there.
AC again. Sometimes the thermostats are stubborn.
It keeps
it just kicked on, so.
All right, perfect. There you go. Right now.
Sorry, bear with me, the computer just lost the connection again.
Is it safe to assume out of 1.2 million remaining expenses, and we're June 11th, 20 days left in the fiscal year, that is not gonna be expended by June 30 at all, just because of,
I don't
if
know
we
if it'll
divide the
be-
number currently spent, like 6.8 million by 11 months, that's about $500,000, right?
Mhm.
So even if we're spending the monthly average, there's still $700,000 that wouldn't be spent, and there's some other stuff that we're just carrying over anyways. Would that be shown there as well, like a
Well, for
dog park
example,
playground and?
the insurance. The current bid, the current rate is like $165,000.
Yeah,
And that has to be
That's a
paid by
savings,
the
yeah.
end of the month. So that's gonna come out of this remaining budgeted expense. That's a big chunk of it.
The insurance? No,
That's
we
a
won't
savings.
pay it. The policy year will start July 1st.
But do we pay the whole year at once, or do we pay quarterly,
I
or?
think we pay it over time, but we won't pay.
So we've
we're
already
paying full
paid
for this year.
completely
Yeah,
for this year?
77, yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know how we
Mhm.
paid that, if we paid it annually or quarterly or what. Because some insurance companies give you a reduction if you pay it annually.
Yeah,
Well, that was part of the money that would be not spent out of 1.2, because we budgeted 150, I think, so 77 is current expenditure there, so that's half of it, right? So 70 out of this, in addition to other stuff that we haven't spent. Hire the code enforcement later, so I guess I'm saying realistically, this isn't a number we'll spend by the end of it. That's just,
No, I-
but also kind of
I
state.
don't think that we'll spend, I don't know that we'll spend the entire thing, but there's still, payroll.
Mhm.
That'll have to go through this. We still have a lot of projects that are going on, and a
Well,
lot
yeah,
of
we haven't
other
paid probably
things.
for the sidewalk work yet, because it's still ongoing, or do we
Yeah,
pay?
that'll come out of the grant side.
Oh, that's a grant. okay.
But there's still a lot of things. We had to remediate a pond. That's gonna cost like $25,000. We,
Was that the Boothurst?
no,
No,
that's
there-
something else where we just, we're working on that as well. That'll cost at least $1,000, which is clearly a drop in the bucket to the 1.2, but all that to say is there's still a lot of work going on this month, and I don't know, what our actual remaining balance will be.
So we still have basically bills coming in from May, June. In
Oh.
July, we're not getting June bills until July.
Mhm.
That's why we have it open until September, and then
Right.
anything that someone forgot to send us.
Right.
That's
So
how
we-
we-
A lot of
So that will be-
contractors don't even do their bills until,
If we receive the services in fiscal 25,
Or we could
even if we don't pay it till 26,
Right.
we still charge it against the 25 budget.
Yes,
Right.
So how does that show up then in our next year's budget? Like it just doesn't
It
show up
doesn't
as an
show
expense,
down.
just it's in the auditor's report probably, the only
Right.
place it
Yeah.
would show up really.
Correct.
Gotcha, interesting. So the June report that's coming up in July is not
And it-
accounting for like
Mm-mm.
an end of year actuals.
Right.
All right. Thanks.
So, that should say number 3 at the top. Apologies for slide 15. It should say for budget recommendation number 3. But just to go back, we have the current tax rate of 1.2 with the rollback rate of 0.24. 0.4551971. The first recommendation for taxes again was 0.3678158. Right.
I think you can round these to 2 decimals for this, for the future presentation, just,
So
like
this
you'll
is for
still
number
account for all the
3.
decimals when you're making
Yeah.
a bill, but I think for us here, so you don't have to
Okay.
read all these.
Thank you.
You want to check your math, we'll know it's 3.1 or whatever
So, that brings in additional tax revenue of 1.65. And then recommendation number 2 was a proposed rate of 0.37, bringing in additional tax revenue of 1.7 million. This new recommendation based on budget proposal number 3 is 0.355, bringing in additional revenue of 1.4 to break even. And so that's fulfilling the budget with 100% of the deficit with taxes, not using any unreserved
Not
funds.
using it. And this is also based on a uniform tax rate.
Correct.
Because even if the legislature passes it next week and the governor signs it immediately, we don't have time to make a thoughtful determination as to how to divide it or how to.
At this point in the
Portion
game,
it.
I think we need to just make a determination. Personally, I think we need to make a determination for this year so that we have enough time to consider variable tax rates, determine how we want to proportion that, and move forward with that next year, should the state legislature.
So we'll go
decide
with
to
the
do that.
uniform tax rate for fiscal 26. Simply because even if they pass it, we don't have time to
Right.
do it properly.
Right, and I can't make that recommendation to you right now. We can talk in theory. I can't make any hard recommendation about that right now because we don't know how the state's going. to
Well, of course not, but
I did receive an update, just to let you know, after the revised resolution was approved last night, I did receive an update from Speaker Minor Brown that we will have this on their agenda at the House next Tuesday. Just so you're all aware, so.
So, sorry, I know you mentioned this, but I'm now a little confused with the totals. Which out of these 3 totals then is the updated,
You're right.
the number 3?
Yep.
7593710? Oh, no, so that's a tax revenues.
we want the total, not good.
7544591 is the new budget?
Yeah.
But so the option 3, that's a new,
Fulfills that budget.
that fulfilled, okay. So why is that, what's the number 2 then doing, that seems to be raising more funds?
Number 2
About
was for the
300.
larger budget, which was presented at the last meeting.
Okay, that was my question.
So the proposal number 2 was
So this is
the
without
highest
cuts.
number.
Alright.
It did have cuts, remember when I presented.
No, I know,
initial
but like the
budget?
cuts that we made last
Yeah.
meeting and this meeting
Yep,
are represented in number 3, but number 2 has, those cuts would be reversed, I suppose. There'll still be cuts in it, but I understand. Thank you.
and then because we've talked about it, every other meeting, I wanted to present those other options, on slide 16. And these are fulfilling the budget half. The first one, option one on the left, is half coverage by a tax increase and half coverage by using our reserves. So we would bring in tax revenue of $3,846,855 and use unreserved funds of $746,855. And then on the right, we have a 75-25 option to bring in tax revenue of $4,179,782 and use unreserved funds in the amount of $359,927.
In terms of that and splitting it, has the county, Mr. Day, or does anyone else know how the county has the county made a decision about their taxes? Their tax rate, if we're talking about potentially deferring some of our tax increase to next year and taking the balance from reserves, then next year, if we jump the tax rate again, are the residents also going to face an increased county tax?
Yes, next year they almost 100% will.
Okay, and the school tax, the school board met last night. I have not had a chance to look at the recording. Obviously, I couldn't attend, none of us could attend because we had to be at our meeting. But there may be an increased school tax next year. And my point is, if we defer our tax increase, the residents may get hit with a triple whammy next year.
Well, I think Colonial has already gotten approved for a tax rate increase next year through the last referendum. I
Right,
think it was like 2 or 3
It was the 2 or
like
3
phases.
tiered, but they had some options, was my understanding. that
Well, I
they
think
could-
their options are this year,
Oh,
whether they're gonna take the increase or not. You know what I mean?
They
So,
are. They're increasing,
Yeah,
they're increasing the rate over and above the
yeah,
referendum.
right, this year.
because they can't,
And they can only do it this year.
yeah.
When you say this year, do you mean tax year
This-
26?
This,
FY 26? Okay,
Pick free money for them.
they can't do it for another 5 years unless it's a referendum. They
okay.
can only do it when the
So
county,
they could not increase again for fiscal 27.
only if they did it through referendum.
They're only if they did a referendum. Okay, so it's a double whammy potentially, because the county tax will go up for fiscal 27. And if we choose one of these options, then our tax would definitely go up again next year. Whereas if we do it all now to cover our budget with no drawing down reserves, then we might not have to do one next year. We'd have to see how things work out.
With just one clarification for Colonial is that it was a 3-year referendum. So next year will also automatically go up for the referendum.
Oh,
rate.
it will from the referendum.
Referendum
I
rate,
thought it
not,
was a 3-tiered increase.
yeah, for the referendum rate it will, but not any other change to the base rate that they're doing now.
Okay,
But what we also know is that next year our budget will increase at least by about $400,000.
quite like that.
And then probably actually in excess of that.
Right,
some other
so if
considerations.
we took the full increase this year to the break-even amount to not have to draw down reserves, then next year, all right, if the expenses go up 400,000, that would be a relatively modest increase to bring in that extra 400,000. It's not like bringing in an extra million or 1,000,007 or, the various amounts that are here. It would allow us to do a more modest increase, whereas if we defer some of this
Yeah,
year's
this is the-
increase, push it back to next year, then we're gonna have to do both.
Yeah,
Right.
but also a consideration is we're based upon the projections here on the page, none of them are actually quote unquote fully funding a budget, right? She's holding back hiring people, she's band-aiding, right? So we're still not quote unquote fully funding, providing the city with what she's telling us to do.
The services, we're deferring some services by delaying hiring.
And delaying hires, so next year you'll see that full amount. that
Right,
We, took out.
so that's gonna bring it
But
up.
that's because of the impact of reassessment, no tax.
Right,
So I think that's-
trying to
yeah.
mitigate that
And that's why,
impact this year.
I'm looking at the last option presented with a 25% being unreserved, for several reasons, not to soften a blow by $360,000 on taxes, but just because of the revenue side, we talked the last meeting, we increased them. But we also talked about interest being, historically low or going down, so that could, that would shift a lot of our, revenue lines up, even beyond our projections potentially. So like, in anticipation of those things, and second part of that equation for me is we never really spend what we budget for typically on expense sides. So like combo of those, so there's always something we carry over. I would hate to raise taxes for people for that amount. I know that's hard to predict, but I'm,
Well,
as
that
you're
means,
looking at that, there's always something that gets carried over, so like, I would rather not raise tax for all that, I know that we have stuff that we're cutting already, but that's kind of that's why I'm with my thinking, like,
well, then,
there's a little buffer I would like to put in
I
there.
understand, but then
that.
we're gonna have to remember that when we go back to funding the budget stabilization and the capital improvement fund, because currently we talked about putting any leftover revenue into those funds. And if we do that, then we can't do what you're saying, so we're just gonna have to be aware of that, how all the pieces fit together.
No, yeah, it's, like, yes, next year we might have to raise the tax again, but it would be much smaller increase than it is right now, and this kind of accounts for some of the historical trends you see in our expenditures that are typically lower than what we budget for. So I don't know by how much, it depends on the given year, honestly, so,
I think two things. One, if we don't go with one of these options and we're gonna take the full hit this year, which I understand. I don't think I'm voting to raise taxes again next year.
Mhm.
I mean, when we look at the optics of this and look where we're at, I mean, if we had to raise 400,000 next year, we could do that out of the reserves. You know what I mean? But I would also say our charge this year is to figure out where the other revenue is coming from, whether it's additional fees, whether it's a new revenue source. I mean, we all see this coming. But I also don't think I want to go back and say, hey, the city didn't raise taxes for 16 years. Now we did it 2 years in a row.
Yeah, that's true,
You know
and,
what I mean? It's just,
and with the fee study, if we do that,
Yeah.
that may bring in additional revenue
Yeah.
from the fees next year.
I would
Yep.
agree.
no, yeah, I mean, raising all of it is very much a real option, it's more of a trying to soften it, so it's not 40 years and 16 years combined, I'm more thinking about a person paying a property tax 100% more versus maybe 75,
right.
So those are the things that, go into my thinking there, but yeah. I'm not too worried about increasing tax 2 years in a row, because the second increase would be, I don't know, 5%, 10%, but much smaller than 100% right now. But I understand where you're coming from optics, like back to back, so especially for us not raising in 16 years, so that, yeah, I can see both. We trimmed the budget today by, $126,000, so, and that's in addition to cuts that we already made to the budget in the past, and but yeah, so.
And just, I completely understand both sides. I think we have to make a hard decision, regardless. But, just to further drive home Councilman Marley's point, this is for a little less than 400,000 if you went with that 75-25. And we're talking about adding another 400,000 at least next year.
Right.
So you're only just delaying the problem.
Right.
And then if that scenario is of not, I won't say not doing anything, next year, 2 years from now, it would be almost $1 million.
Right.
In terms of the growth, so it grows exponentially very quickly.
And
And this hasn't accounted for if we do something with the exemptions.
I think it does.
So,
I think this does over account for it, because I looked at a parcel file myself, and I think right now we're accounting for 173,000 for 240 parcels. So, and that's not even, that's not, ours is 32 right now, we're negotiating that, right? So I think there's potentially more revenue there to be added, or but this covers that, I guess, that's what I'm saying, like, I think, I don't know, we're
Yeah, I
from
don't-
county, but I raised
don't
the
know
issue.
the full number,
Yeah.
but we did connect with the county because we see that some of their exemptions are carrying over that we don't exempt certain properties for. So like their senior property, we have our own senior property, but for some reason it's reflecting on our end. And they shared that that's because, you know, their exemptions aren't complete, so like whatever they shared with us.
Yeah, there's like
Today.
eight parcels that have like I look in their parcel searches like exempted, but then it says senior exempt 40 max or 72 max. But those are the old numbers, right? So that's like, it makes sense that the full amount was exempted because it's the old amounts, but we don't have the updated ones to say, okay, why are they now exempt? But that probably isn't even exempt by us. They have the permanent disability exemption. They had,
Veterans exemption.
veterans exemption. They had disability exemption. And like, they call the churches and trusts, like, what is it they call it?
They call it a government.
Yeah, something like that. So like
And
those parcels.
You said it was done.
general government. They shared those exemptions with us. Some may be exempted more on the file that we have, but we have to go with that more conservative number of, you know, understanding that we have potentially less revenue because we don't know the full extent of, you know, what we could have. On the other hand, you know, there's that other line in there where they have the full amount that would totally inflate the numbers too high for us to even.
Yeah,
consider.
and theirs is not only the number 173, it's also age. Sorry, the income is 65,000 as well. I was looking today. So they have, yeah, 240 that are at 173, and then 6 of them are like at a half of that, like because they do like a partial thing. And then there's 6 more that are different numbers than those 2 that we need to ask county what was that, you know?
Yeah, so they're working on, as they
Reduction
finalize their
for-
numbers, they're trying to get us
Mhm.
better numbers. But I don't have any firm confirmation of when we'll get to that, so that's fine. I'm hoping by the time we have to finalize this, if not, we have to go with what we have right now, because we have to move this and finalize.
So long answer, I think it's accounting for more than, you know, I think it's accounting already in it and putting steps on, yeah.
So if we have to go with our current numbers, which may be an underestimate of our tax revenue, is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Or is it an overestimate because?
We would have more in revenue because we're.
Because it shows
taxing personal
exemptions
property.
that we don't grant.
So there's 220 properties that will probably be much less in a sense that both with income eligibility that are eligible with county, that wouldn't be with us. And also ours, if it remains 32 or whatever the new number would come with. So then you're having more property to tax, I guess, in a sense, so
But-
it will show us
but
the revenue.
What I was trying to get to
Mhm.
was, so if we have to go with the current numbers, which may be an underestimate of our tax revenue, then next year, that's gonna give us greater reserves potentially, which could mean that we don't have to raise taxes again if we have enough to cover the 400,000 that we average
possible.
increase year to year, plus whatever else comes up.
Yeah, but it's possible, but we still have to take into account, we need to finalize our decision about the senior tax discount and our own disability tax discount, so we still
Right.
have to take that reduction.
And you
into account.
haven't pulled, and I think you said the reduction under our current exemption is
40,000.
40,000 a year. So if we're
It's not
we're
32.
more than doubling the income level. No, we're not. We're going, if we go with the proposal, we're going from 15,000 for an individual, 15
20.
and 30 to 20 and 40.
Mhm.
So we're increasing it by 50%. So maybe 50% more people will qualify and maybe there'll be $60,000 of lost revenue. I mean, that's about as good as we're gonna be able to figure because we don't know how many people fall between the 1530 and 2040 income levels.
Yeah, I mean, I know that would create more reserves back to that point, but I would rather not tax people with lower income, you know, like, and then figure it out next year. So hopefully by next meeting we have, you
Yeah,
know,
hopefully we
with
have
that
Better
we scheduled
numbers.
last night for that ordinance, it will be something we have numbers from county that we can say, this is the anticipated.
And if
impact.
the other issue, which I think is a valid one that Mr. Day and Mr. Zelt raised, by only exempting 32,000 of value, that's not a whole lot.
Right.
Under the new assessments.
Yeah.
And at this point, my thinking is I would rather raise that limit than raise the income limits. In other words, give the people with the lowest income a greater exemption than give more people a smaller exemption. if you follow.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I 32,000 is like.
I think personally, I think you have to do a little bit of both,
Well,
but.
well, we are raising the income levels.
Right.
And so if we leave them there, I know they are not fully reflective of the inflation since those older limits were set.
Right.
But if we still stick with them and raise the exempt amount of assessed value, to me, that's the compromise, rather than jumping up to the, what was it, 40 and 65 or
47 or something, 46,
Yeah.
47,000.
if we
rounded
jump
up.
the income level up to that.
23 was the other one, I think.
And not raise 32, to me, that's giving more people a smaller discount rather than giving the neediest people a greater discount.
And I did ask Antonina, and I think she already reached out to county to see if county is able to share
Yeah,
220 parcels that are exempt, that reduced value in theirs, and see if they can share the income that people report in the application. And if they're not able to share that, to at least share a column with us that says 40 for a couple or 20, for the individual, so we know they would fall under that new category, so they're not providing actual number, but rather just, this is, instead of 200, would go down to 100 maybe parcels for us, so that we can redo the parcel a little better, and then use some census to fill in with how many more eligible would be based on income and age, to kind of get a.
But we have
get
to
a range.
consider all three of these ordinances.
Absolutely.
This one, the set-asides for the budget stabilization and capital fund, and the budget itself. We have to consider them we have to look at the big picture when
Sure.
we're
Right.
deciding on all three of them. We can't do them in isolation.
Yeah, that's why we brought it to the budget meetings, yeah, for sure.
so we'll talk more about that next week. And I will hopefully have an update from the county. They have a lot going on, trying to finalize the assessment, so I don't know that we'll get it, but I'm hopeful that we will. They're very responsive and helpful, so I'm hopeful that we'll get that. We're done, that's all I have for the presentation, if I can move on
I just want to
to.
ask council something for half and half, please. Can we go next time without half and half, just to focus on eyes on quarter and then full break even as a presentation? Or is there still appetite to see half and half option? Judging, no, just because of conversation we just had about quarter, but
I've looked at the differences between a bunch of them, and over a monthly basis, we're looking at like a dinner difference between households.
the half,
You're going out for a dinner or something, so it's not huge impact, I mean, definitely an impact, but, based on what we need to do, I think we just really need to go for the full one, believe it or not.
but then if you can remove the half and half for next time, so we're
Yep,
not
yeah,
considering it,
numbers.
yeah.
Hey, saves us some time,
I'm-
so
I'm
thank
just so we
you.
can have more
Right.
focus on two options, yeah.
So can we talk about the state legislation for the variable rate? I heard what you said, and I just kind of wanted to walk through the timeline and really just make sure that there's no way that we're gonna be able to do this year before we just dismiss it.
Yeah, I think that's fair, I think.
So I heard you say that it was gonna be on the schedule for the House
On Tuesday,
on Tuesday.
yes, then it has to go to the Senate committee and then the Senate floor.
So it could be done by Tuesday, potentially Wednesday, because they move the same day, right?
No, it goes to the House and then they declare it, and then it has to go to committee.
Senate committee.
Senate committee, and then it has to get out of committee, and then it goes to the Senate, and then.
It goes twice to committee? I thought it just goes to one
Yeah,
committee.
yeah.
Oh,
What about both?
Oh.
Both has to go through.
I thought it just went from, if it says we're in a committee, then to
Even,
that chamber and then the other chamber.
even if, wildly optimistic, the House passes it on Tuesday, the Senate committee meets on Wednesday, the full Senate approves it on Thursday, and the governor signs it on Friday. That gives us like 2 weeks to make a complex decision.
Mhm.
How are we gonna decide are we just gonna use our zoning categories, or as you have suggested, are we gonna use square footage? That's, or whatever, you were suggesting an alternate way, which land use, okay. But nonetheless, so we have to make that decision. And then once we've made that decision, we have to decide what the variable rates will be. And we need to compare those for the businesses to the surrounding areas, the unincorporated county and the other cities around us, because we don't want to price ourselves out of the business market. All that is a complex process, and I don't see us doing that thoughtfully in 2 weeks.
I don't know where you're going with the variable rates or how complex it is. But if we already have the percentages and we just wanna make the percentages equal, that gives you your variable rate.
Well, that
And-
gives us the rate.
And
yeah.
again, it's easy to dismiss, but I'm still worried about families, you know what I mean? If options open, that's all. I don't know if 2 weeks is enough or not. I don't think, and I mean, frankly, we already have 4 categories. I don't know if it's adequate or not. But if we've already broken it down into these 4 categories, at the very least, we could do these 4 categories and,
So what, I've seen the other 2 municipalities do is have a residential rate and then a rate for the commercial, industrial and utility altogether. So they just deal with 2. So to start, we could look at doing that. We definitely couldn't get the whole, this ordinance that's in front of you, get that approved by the 26th. We would need more time to work that out, revise this ordinance, to accommodate for that type. We'd probably look at going to July. For that. So. It's doable. But it's not
If they
sustainable.
approve it by next Friday, which is a big if.
Mhm.
What all we need to do by the end of the year right now is approve the rollback one, am I correct?
I think we have to
No,
have.
we have to approve the budget.
We have to approve a budget.
Budget.
And the tax bills have to go out by mid-July and they're not prepared overnight.
No.
Not at all.
Are you saying that before 4th of July I can't do this?
After.
I'm kidding. No, I'm, it's a joke. Well, yes, I think what Councilperson Day is saying is, I'm gonna read it out now, like,
it's just a math.
I'm concerned about that same thing. I'm sure everybody here is concerned about that too. Like currently, average property tax for residential is 500. It would go to 1,000 if we adopt the full option here, and that would be 760 if we use land use. That's just half, blows reduces that by half. I guess the impact from 500 to 1,000, 100%, goes about 52%, I believe was the percentage of increase. So that's the impact we're talking about with land use versus.
When you say land use, I don't understand, because zoning is land use.
Yeah, but
Land
it's
use on the
the,
comprehensive.
it's not like,
plan is
Oh.
zoning is R1, R2, R3.
Yeah,
Whereas land use books them all under residential. And then has
Well, yeah,
utility, then
I
has
mean,
light industrial, has commercial separate, has industrial separate, has agriculture separate, but we don't have anything that's taxed there, open space, and I think that's it. There's 6
Right,
categories.
right. I know we would
Yeah,
lump
one has
all our
to-
R1, R3, HR, those would all be lumped together because they're all residential.
Mhm.
That, I think, is pretty obvious.
But if we go by zoning, then we have to go by every category. I think
We
we
would
can't
just
just.
have to, but we could name all these categories, R1,
If we
R2,
go by-
HR, the rate is X.
I'm looking at you. I don't think we can do that, right? We have to choose, and then R1 will be separate rate, right? R2, I think law, right?
We would have to make each one
If we
separate.
choose zoning, but if we choose land use, it would already do
We
that for us.
could not say R1 and R2 are the same rate.
Well, so I think you're saying the same thing, just how you classify. So if your variable rate has to treat everybody the same in a class. And so I think what is being said is that you've got your residential rate, your commercial rate, your industrial, and your commercial industrial utilities
Right,
all
that's-
into
yeah.
one, and that's your 2. If you did it R1, R2, they're all residential.
Right.
But they all have different rates because R1 produces a certain amount of revenue, R2, so I
Well,
think.
well, no, the impact, the rate's the same.
And if I could simplify it a little more, the
Yeah.
county parcel file that we have, the county breaks it up by those broader residential and
Residential,
commercial.
yeah.
If we did it that way,
Open space, yeah.
So maybe the better, it's the use classification versus the zoning. So it's the
Yeah,
use
land use.
classification is
Residential.
what you're looking at, and
Yes.
you don't do it by your zoning.
So anything zoned residential, of whatever category of residential, could be taxed at the same rate. And anything zoned, I think we have general, commercial and,
Just regular, it's all booked as a commercial and the land use.
right, so, all right, and then we have commercial and we have industrial and light industrial, right? So we'd have to lump those two.
Correct.
So we'd have potentially 3, residential, commercial and industrial.
But just
Can't lump
group
them
it all
into that
together.
point. You wouldn't be able to lump them. It would just have to be all the groups together, I believe. I don't think we can choose, pick and choose, right?
right, if we do it based on
Land use, by some, whatever we do,
the
right?
classification from the county. we could do it that way,
Mhm.
by those general groupings. Or we can do it by these broader, or not.
Oh, yeah, we have
narrow
mixed use is one other,
groups.
other use.
They make it more difficult. if it's-
Yeah.
Make it a little bit more broader so that it's
Well,
easier to administer. I mean, I can see.
And it
Or just-
equalizes it a bit more too by having
know.
fewer
I will never-
categories.
I don't, well, one, we talked about it, seeing if the system can handle that many
7 or 8.
rates. Because what we've seen when we've done our research, it's residential and commercial. I don't know if the system could take that.
Yeah, but
many-
see, here's my issue with that in a sense, because I'm looking at average tax currently paid by those different land uses. Industrial's paying 25,000, light industrial 20, just those two combined. That light industrial's paying for a difference of industrial. Then you got utility paying 17,000 on average, commercial 3,300. Mixed use 2,770. Residential 500, and then open space 156. So I mean, that's what I'm saying, like, once we start booking them, then there's more discrepancy being one land use is then getting a little tax credit in a sense because of the other one is lower on average tax payment in the past, or their property value is lower, I guess. So that's what I'm saying. So booking them into commercial, then industrial 25,000, and small business on our Delaware Street or in Route 9 is 3,000, let's say total. That's a huge group to be in, I guess.
Right, that is.
But even, sorry, even when we looked at for the House bill, charter change, when we grouped them together more broadly, I think overall commercial was getting a larger.
It all goes based on the percentages of the
But how
growth.
does-
whether-
right.
yeah,
How does that work for some of the properties on Delaware Street that have a business on the ground floor and residences on the upper floors?
they will be mixed use, I think.
They're mixed use?
I think that mixed use because it's downtown David.
I don't know if our
Mixed use.
system sees mixed use. Like
Well,
some
the
of
land use
those,
does, yeah.
some of those that you have, I don't know if it's like, it sees.
Our
That-
system may
Well,
not.
if your system has county, then it
Right,
doesn't,
right.
yeah. If your system is using those county letters, then yeah, it'll be their classifications, but yeah.
Well, she just said that they don't have it.
No, I know, but you said it's just commercial and residential, right? Is that what you said?
Commercial and residential.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Like
No,
we
the-
have different classifications of residential, but I don't, like you're seeing right on your sheet,
Mhm.
you have. Mixed usage. I don't know in our system if we have a category mixed usage. It might be considered somewhere else in commercial.
It would all be under yours, all of these different ones I said, except
commercial.
residential will be commercial, yeah.
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 So we would end up with 2 categories.
Yeah, but I'm
Residential.
arguing against that because there would, small businesses
But
would
she's
be.
saying our system doesn't have the capacity to do that.
I don't,
It's not
know, I'm not saying that.
I don't think you do.
It's not
Yeah,
currently.
It's not currently like that.
They would just have to have a list of parcels.
But
land
that
use
would
to-
be another time consuming thing to change. And another reason why we might not be able to do it beyond certainly 2 categories this year. And then we have a year to work out adjusting the system for
I don't know.
potential multiple categories in the future.
I always say that I don't think it would be allowed because if you go to our map, comprehensive plan, and go to maps there, you see the land use is one of those maps, right? So whoever did that for us can give us a list of, for them to create that map, they flag every single parcel with a land use.
But
because
does
they
that-
won't code
but
it.
for
So they
them
just
to-
share that for us and we put it in our system. So I
But
think
that
I'm
means
saying
somebody
yes.
has to sit there line by line by line and change the codes.
No, why would we change line by line? Just the whole file can just be merged with it.
Let us get in touch with the.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would think it would be more automatic.
It depends on the nature of the software that we have. It's old software.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean.
Let me see what it's capable of. It's capable of having so many tax rates. I am not sure that it is, like I said, but I'll double check.
Alright.
But, the Ellesmere rate that we saw and the Odessa rate, they were just the 2 different. One for residential, the one for commercial, which included the industrial and the other.
Yeah, I understand the limitations on our system, but I also understand the county sends it and they are classified by property class.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So there's certainly a difference between industrial and commercial and the county tax.
And I'm talking about city,
System.
so I've matched the parcel number to every single, our land use, so that we can be more, have this conversation where we can say, okay, this is what it means to us, but yeah. If it cannot be added to the system, we're just, so I think that's the next thing to check, and if it's not something we can easily change, then yeah.
certainly, if it's not easily changed in our system, that's not something we can do this year. It doesn't mean we can't do it in a future year.
Mhm.
Because.
I think this is the year to do it if we're gonna do it because of the impact it would have
But
on
if
people
the
that.
system doesn't have the capacity to do it in 2 weeks, it's.
Oh, no, I'm saying I wouldn't even pursue it in the future if, if we do two rates this year or one rate, then there's no point in doing it later because reassessment happens every 5 years. The idea behind this is that this offsets 40 years worth of no reassessment, and now you're comparing the increase in industrial with residential or vice in some other categories. So like that would be gone, I guess is what I'm saying by that point.
Well,
People would already.
well, let's
yeah,
wait,
But
wait.
yes,
Either way, we don't have the approval yet.
Yeah.
We'll continue working on that. We'll see if we can consider and have time to do that. But just know if we do decide to do that, we can't pass the tax rate by the 30th of June. So
but we would know by Tuesday, end of Tuesday,
If
whether it
passes.
passed the House, and then we have, if it passed, then, okay, that's a positive sign. I'm not saying it still passed the Senate, but, we have some
It looks
indication,
more
or if it's dead by then, like they voted it out and,
Yeah.
we know if it's focused only on one. What was that?
So I think you must gamble a lot.
I'm-
Because it's like,
I'm just
if
talking about-
if the information leans this way, then we're gonna go with it.
No, I'm talking about timeline that Councilperson Day asked about, so I'm
Yeah,
just trying
no,
to
I
think
get
about,
that.
by Tuesday, we will know that if it didn't pass, then we can just. vote
Well,
for
yeah,
one-
if it
one-
doesn't pass on Tuesday, we're
yeah,
done.
we'll meet again
I
on
don't
Wednesday.
gamble, but.
We'll meet again on Wednesday and talk about it.
Right.
And have a better sense of what.
Okay.
So, ordinance 225-555 is before you. I want to give a huge disclaimer that this is extremely inflated. The numbers on this are extremely inflated because we are still working on the budget. I don't know if there's any potential additions, deductions. I don't know if we're determining, to get the full taxable amount, what we're determining. So I just want to be clear that the numbers that I put in here are subject to change. They definitely will change because they're higher than we're even talking about right now. So I just want to be clear as day that they're extremely inflated. I want everyone to know that. And I just did that so that we have the opportunity to adjust them appropriately in time for.
But if we put in, if I understood what you told me correctly, if we start with if we pass this with lower numbers, we cannot increase.
If we introduced it with lower numbers, right, then
We
we couldn't
cannot
have it in.
increase, but if we introduce it with higher numbers, we can decrease. So the reason for putting the higher numbers in the ordinance is to give us the recognizing that we're not gonna go this high.
Right.
But we need to give ourselves the flexibility.
I'm just curious, why is that? I don't know, if there's.
State law.
Yeah, so you have to notice your ordinance, and when you notice the ordinance, you can lessen the impact. Without having to reintroduce the ordinance, but you can't increase the impact. So for example, if you said we're doing a 50% tax increase and that's what's introduced and somebody sees it and they say, oh, I'm fine with that, and you pass 100%, then the argument is they never had an opportunity. But if you say 100%, and they say, I'm fine with that, and you pass 50, they'll be fine with it. So that's the idea. You have to introduce it at a level, but if you want to make a change, you can reduce it, you can't increase it.
I only have fear because the rollback rate might be different once we hear from county about these adjustments that were already made to the file, like, so we might have to correct that, so like, this might be a lower number to begin with, I guess. So I would make an amendment here to make this higher number, just for, if that's the ruling, then I would be scared that we're locked into a 2.4, but it's really 3 to begin
But
with.
this isn't locking us into 2.4.
But we can't go higher, I guess is what I'm saying.
This is a 26% increase.
I'm talking about this
Oh.
right here.
Well,
That
we
number,
have to
can't change.
state what the rollback is.
But
So
I'm
we
saying
can
we're
make it
offering
higher.
a wrong number right now.
Let's make it, let's make it 0.35, just arbitrarily.
And it's the same thing for the
That's
total
okay.
budget, sorry, like 7.7, because I don't know what comes to the end of the year. So we can't change that.
So
Right,
thi-
it's like Mike talked.
This is an ordinance that is proposing an increase in taxes. That's the number that you're introducing, and that you can go lower, you can't go higher. The rollback rate is going to be what it is. And so the point is that rollback rate can change, whether it goes higher or lower, without having to reintroduce the ordinance. What can't go higher is the tax increase itself.
So section one is what cannot go higher, is that correct then? So rollback rate is not an issue being at 0.24 right now,
That's correct.
and then 26 will just change whenever the rollback rate's corrected, correct? Like that's just gonna be,
Yeah.
so are we talking about 0.5 or 100 is what we're talking about right now, or is there another place?
Pardon?
No, that's correct. I mean, section, it's the ordinance section one where you're talking about the tax increase. Just to clarify, Antonina, did you wanna?
Yeah, I think my math must have been wrong and it should stay 104% now.
Oh,
I mean, yeah, we're talking about 100% right now, so, yeah.
104%?
Correct.
You're talking about in section 3.
well, the last whereas on page one, is that right?
Yeah, in section 1 and 3.
There's 3 places, yes.
Let me look at the.
It's doubling the
We're gonna get it.
It's double. I was just happy.
So 104.
The map. 124, 1.5.
This one's going.
Sorry about
So I guess we need to do tonight's the first reading, right? So I'll simply read it.
Yes.
And then that will be it for tonight. And then next week, we can have a full discussion.
We have a full discussion. We have a public hearing scheduled for the 26th of June. To deal with this as well.
So we can discuss it before the public hearing? Because next
Yeah.
week's the
Yeah,
18th.
Sorry, we can't discuss it until the 26th.
Okay. So this is the first reading of ordinance 2025-555. An ordinance to establish a property tax rate upon total reassessment and to temporarily reduce certain penalties for delinquent tax payments. Whereas the council of the city of Newcastle, city council, possesses the authority to adopt, amend, modify, or repeal the city of Newcastle Municipal Code, City Code. And whereas Title 22, Section 105 of the Delaware Code obligates the city council to adopt an ordinance establishing a new property tax rate upon completion of a total property reassessment. And whereas a total property reassessment was completed by Newcastle County in July 2025. And whereas Title 22, Section 1106 of the Delaware Code obligates the city to compute a rollback rate based upon the new total property reassessment, which is that rate which results in the property tax revenue as was generated during the prior fiscal year. And whereas this rollback rate has been calculated to be 0.2404551971, and whereas Delaware law allows the city to increase its property tax rate upon total reassessment by ordinance, but requires the city identify the percent by which the tax rate to be levied exceeds the rolled back rate. And whereas the city finds that a 104% increase to the property tax is prudent and appropriate and in the best interest of the city and its residents. And whereas the city council recognizes that a total reassessment has not been completed in Newcastle County since 1983, and that the reassessment process has led to some confusion among the public. And whereas the city council further finds that a temporary reduction in the standard interest charges applied to delinquent tax payments is reasonable and appropriate and in the best interest of the city and its residents. Whereas the city administrator has presented the proposed fiscal year 2026 general fund and grant budget to city council members, the mayor, and the city treasurer. And whereas the mayor and the city council members have advertised and held public meetings to discuss and make appropriate changes to the proposed budget. And whereas the fiscal year 2026 general fund budget is balanced at $7,700,000 and contains proposed wage adjustments for city employees. And whereas the fiscal year 2026 grant budget is balanced at $3,300,000. And whereas the general budget and the grant budget are to be managed by the city administrator. Now therefore, making the express finding that the provisions of this ordinance enhance and promote the health, safety, and welfare of the city of Newcastle, be it ordained by the council of the city of Newcastle as follows. Effective July 1st, 2025, the property tax rate shall be 0.5 per $100, which represents a 104% increase in the tax rate over the rollback rate for only those real estate taxes levied in 2025. City Code Chapter 2021 Taxation, Article 4, Abatement, Section 221-15 Notice is hereby amended as follows, with new language identified in bold, underlined, and deleted text shown by bold strike through text. 221-15 Notice. A notice stating that a discount or abatement of 2% shall be allowed on all taxes paid prior to September 1st, 2025, and that taxes paid between September 1st, 2025 and September 30th, 2025 shall not be entitled to a discount or abatement, and that taxes paid on or after October 1st of each year are subject to an interest charge of 1.5% for the months of October and November, and 6% for the months of December. And for each consecutive month after December, an additional interest charge of 1% until the total amount of taxes due has been paid shall be attached to or incorporated in every tax bill sent to a taxpayer. Section 3, that the fiscal year 2026 total city budget is adopted at $11 million, and the resulting tax rate shall be set at 0.5 per $100 of assessed value, reflecting a 104% tax rate increase from the rollback rate to the new fiscal year commencing on July 1st, 2025. Section 4, if any section, subsection, sentence, clause, or phrase of this ordinance is for any reason held to be unconstitutional or invalid, such decision shall not affect the validity of the remaining portions of this ordinance. Section 5, in the event any existing ordinance or parts of ordinances are in conflict herewith, the provisions of this ordinance shall control. Section 6, this ordinance shall become effective immediately upon its adoption and approval. So that's it until the 26th, right?
So just look at a path forward. Next week, if you have, I hope to have any final changes incorporated, for the actual budget. So any other additions or deletions that you'd like to propose, please send them to me by Friday or Monday at latest. So that I can make those decisions in time, so that we can have the final number clear. And then at that point, we'll have a better understanding of where the state sits with the charter change, and we can discuss all the other ordinances on it.
When is our next meeting, sorry?
Tonight.
My only request before then would be if we, after Tuesday, if you could have a prepared ordinance to be read with. If in the meantime, you check the capability of the system for different
Yes.
land use, because we're talking about timeline, right? So like if we're gonna go with the other route, we'll know a little bit on Tuesday, but I guess we can have an ordinance being read on 18th.
Well, it's too late. The agenda's already been posted.
So so if we're going with 2 rates or 7 rates, I guess we wouldn't be able to do it before June 30th. Is that?
We shouldn't presume that we're gonna get this approved by the state and present anything that presumes that we are. We should only present it once we know for sure. So until we have that final decision from the state, I don't think we should.
So there's no ordinance
An ordinance.
drafted until then, okay.
Correct. I mean,
I just wanted to have something right that we can.
You can
later
at
say
least
this is
find
relevant.
out what our system's capable of, but,
Absolutely.
but then we have to wait and see what they do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Item 4 is just a discussion regarding fiscal year tax recommendation, 25 tax recommendations. I think we've sort of been doing that.
Yes.
I did have a question from the last meeting. I know we had talked about the surfacing of the basketball court at Dobbinsville.
Yes.
And I know that you said you follow up.
Yeah, I'm waiting on a quote. They went out and looked at the site. Our contractor looked at the site. He just didn't give me, he wasn't able to get me an update on
Okay.
it this week.
Okay.
That
I
is
just
not
want to make sure.
No. Just that extra, I think, 2,000 that I initially put in. But he did at least determine that he can't just pave over it, he has to remove the layers and then add new. So it'll
That would add to the
cost more
cost.
than we thought, yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
Any other general comments? Okay, so now we have, oh,
For the next meeting, yeah, I do have something written down here. If you could bring just the fees that we have, it would be great, just have a list. I
Yeah,
know we have a
I can
website, but if you can just have that prepared for next meeting, that'd be great. Thank you.
okay, anything
That's
else?
all.
Okay, so now public comments. Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
Sorry, are you one short somewhere?
Good evening. My name is Richard Stapp. And I've introduced myself before to this group, so you know who I am. First of all, I suggest that the city request an updated appeals list from the county, because in the prior list of the tax roll, the at-risk number is simply wrong. It's too small a way of assessed value compared to what I know is appealed just in our organization. So there's something wrong with the at-risk number. Secondly, I think that the amount of new assessment that is exempted under the senior and disability is about 44 million of assessment in the previous tax roll that I saw. The county does have the city zoning parcel by parcel, and I hope that they provide that to you in their database. Let's see. Question, I don't need an answer. Can the city adopt a budget and then amend it prior to sending out the tax bills? If that would give you some additional few days. Or even in mid-year, can the city amend its budget and send out adjusted tax bills? Question. How to define a class? If the state legislature approves variable tax rates, the flexibility in the proposed language, I think, is should not be limited to the idea that it's a class as defined by Newcastle County, or it's a class as defined by use or zoning. I think I would propose to define a class as the property owners who most need the help, applied by an objective standard, by a formula. And the handout that I distributed, probably don't have time to read it, but I'll start to. The city and taxpayers face congruent FY26 budget challenges. No tax increases for 16 years. The reassessment and any potential inaccuracies that may be in the reassessment property by property. So what I propose, the first page is the problem. I only have 12 seconds left, 11:10. Solutions on the second. What balance the budget, draw approximately 360,000 from reserves and narrowly target that relief to certain homeowners. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, council. Bill Gross, 1301 13th Street. I guess first, I really feel that the divisions of the properties or the way you want to rate the tax levels should break out retail businesses. It is a distinct defined category. Again, I've said many times, going back to Mike Platt, that the city businesses expect help, but they benefit the city, the residents, nobody else benefits. So I asked that there be a special or a separate category for businesses, commercial industry, industrial, whatever you want to do, but that should be in there. As far as the Dobbinsville basketball court, I've said many times in regards to the dog park, that should be taken off, and I would implore you to take it off. The switcheroo with breaking out the paving separate from the dog park, that talking about optics, that's crazy. Call it what it is, 85,000. I know it'll be much more than that. That should be stopped now, taken off the budget, and you can put it on for next year. But don't keep it on and then say, well, we should have a category and we'll carry it over next year. Take it off. If you want to take some of the money from what you've allotted for that, do it for the basketball court. Because I've spoken to, going on now, 65 residents, and only 2 want a dog park. Out of those 2, they want it in Battery Park. Where you proposed it takes too much improvement, will cost much more, and like I said over and over again, get sponsors where they will benefit, the residents will benefit, and it will be at no cost to the residents, including the upkeep. Get a landscaping company that can handle it. But there's no way that it should be put on the backs of the residents. Is there any transfer tax big amount coming up soon? Or has there been a big tax transfer revenue to the city?
I don't know if there has been. We certainly can't predict the future sale of real estate.
Right, because there's a big property going up for sale. FYI.
Hi, good evening, Laura Fontana. Just the at-risk, so at the Colonial School Board meeting last night, they talked about the at-risk as well. And as we all know, that's going through the formal appeals. So those are properties that have requested a formal appeals that are not complete. And the county probably is not going to get those done before the next fiscal tax year. So just to give you an idea, the school board used a 34% reduction in the total taxable assessed value so that they could do some calculations. So just giving you some insight there. Also for the capital improvement and infrastructure in the budget on the 222-9, it looks like, you know, you are asking the city administrator to put in a 5-year plan, and I'm completely for having the plan. So, but I feel like you're putting the cart before the horse. I feel like you need the plan and then fund it properly. So just something to consider. And also, I think you're really pigeoning yourself with 222-9 subsection C, where it says the cumulative balance must be 500,000 with a 2% allowance. The market can change dramatically in a day. You don't want to limit yourself, I don't think, in a percentage basis. So just some food for thoughts in regards to that. And also lastly, in the ordinance you just read, I do have a question in regards to the number, the third whereas. It says a total property assessment was completed by Newcastle County in 7/25. Shouldn't that say 7/24? Just a little clarification. I saw it was highlighted too, so I thought someone might wanna bring that up. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Else? In answer to the question, I assumed that that said 7/25 because that's when everything is finalized.
So it should say will be, but we don't know when, so the past, present tense may change, that's why,
The fact is that-
that's why it's highlighted.
Okay, we had one email, from Ms. Wright. I do not want an $85,000 dog park. The bar trails available to walk dogs. Taxes are high enough for the services already provided. That's the extent of the email. and So if we are finished with this meeting, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session.
So moved.
A second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you doing this?
Just to vote on the regular meeting.
Only if we need to vote, we will reach them.
No vote will be.
Michael, you're staying for the executive session. Okay.